So definitely a big thank you. And it's also very nice that the institute is thinking about how to keep students updated in spite of the current situation. So that shows the adaptivity and the eagerness of the KCG Institute in taking things forward, keeping students at the forefront. So come what may, we should continue with sharing our knowledge. I think that is well articulated by this, and this is very nice. So what I plan to do today is, maybe in the next 40, 45 minutes, talk about, what are the changes that we are looking at today. And we have currently titled it as, what we call levers of the digital industry. Uh, and then, that is what I think we do need it. So now I'm sharing my screen. So you should be seeing my first screen, which basically provides the title of the talk and on my name and today's date and so on. So with that, I'll start. So at the outset, as I was introduced in the beginning by Professor Kavita, this is a topic that is pan engineering. So not just pan engineering, it is across all possible disciplines that one can think about. It can be science, it can be arts, it can be humanities, engineering, medicine, healthcare, you name it, and everything is part and parcel of this digital industry. So this is the revolution, and this is the era that we are going through. And so I'll start with this content. So if you look at it, the outline of the presentation is going to be in the next slide. But before I go ahead, most of the content is available online. So it is not that I am doing something that is 100% my own research. So there is no such claim. Definitely, you can also do quite a bit of relevant reading. So we need to collaborate and we have to learn from each other. That is very important. So that is what I have done in this as well. And then to the extent possible, in each and every slide, I have provided the references. So you do not have to check, Google it yourself. At least you have a point to start your further deep dive into the specific topic of your interest. And then a lot of things are comments and observations are based on my own experience and what I have seen in my career. Now, it is more than 30 years on the road. So that is what I have gone through. So there can be some subjectivity of my interpretation, but however, you can go to the references, you can do the due diligence to decide, what view you want to take, how you would like to proceed. So with that, caveats and disclaimers, here is the outline of the presentation. So most of the talk will focus on what I call, shifting paradigms. So essentially, it is like if a problem well defined and understood is a problem more than half solved. So that is where we'll focus. So if you know what are the shifts that are taking place, and each of you are very intelligent and you belong to few generations ahead of us, which means you are much younger and you have much more developed thinking capability, and definitely you know how to solve it better than us. So I will focus most of my presentation on the shifting paradigms for today's talk. And then, of course, briefly I'll touch on, what we mean by thinking global and acting local, and then what is a digital industry, and which are the levers, which are actually because of the shifting paradigms that we would already discussed about. So once the levers are seen, then what opportunities are there for us, and then probably a quick final thoughts and a little bit of interaction within the limited time that we have. So this is the outline that I'm going to go through. So now let us jump onto the actual content. So we are talking about the paradigm shift. So every era, probably every decade comes with something totally new. And the first one, if I want to talk at the highest level, it is the discipline-based operations to interdisciplinary. So nobody can say I'm from ECE or I'm from within, if you have a master's, I am only from instrumentation or telecommunication. Those days are gone. Today it is all about completely holistic, and it is all about interdisciplinary. No two things can stay in isolation, and it's not going to work. For example, just to take the healthcare industry, they are pretty much dependent on sensors or the instruments that come from engineering side. In the past, engineers and doctors were seen as two parallel channels. But now, unless they work together, it is very difficult to handle the ground realities today. So, be it robotics assisted surgery or be it a simple thermometer just to detect the body temperature. So, all of them are interdisciplinary. Then that is one thing we'll focus, and then the whole thing is moving from long back things started as a standalone system, and then today we are going from digitization to digitalization. So the digital industry, the maturity depends on how much digitalized are they. The transformation is something we'll discuss. Going on, we'll look at the sensors and relays becoming everything IoT enabled. So a sensor, relay, the distinction are all gone. Everything is becoming a thing. So what does the thing means, and what are the changes we are looking at over a period of time, and what has changed? A quick look at it, and then adoption of cloud. And again, here a blind adoption is not going to be successful, and it can be counterproductive in reality. So we should know what kind of variations are there. Where should the cloud be utilized, where it should not be, or where it should be done locally. So that is something we'll touch upon. Then we'll go on to talk about information management as again the traditional data handling techniques that was followed for the last probably 20, 25 years. Then of course we talk about the immersive experience that current reality techniques that are bringing in, and then something that is typically engineers don't talk about, but that is something you should all be aware of, and which you must practice in today's world. It is about how do we manage the investment and expenses, what we call capex to opex. Do we invest in capital or do we invest in operational expenses? When to do what? So this is the thing that we have to look at it. The entire world is of course focusing on how much can we move to opex from capex. That is the shift that is happening. So these are the topics we'll touch upon. Probably 2 to 3 minutes on each of them. Some of them may be a little longer if they are more technical and interesting. Few of them could be on the shorter side. Moving on. So I think this is a one slide or one picture. It has a lot of things in it. So what you see here is basically a lot of greenery around, and then there is a river or stream that is just going around. And if you really look at it, this is a bridge, and you can see how it is half done and the other part is still missing. So maybe one can even think of it as a place where somebody wants to jump for swimming, or all those, or a place for fishing and things like that. But the reality is this is a bridge, and it is real. It is not a graphics. This actually is there in Netherlands. It is being constructed as we speak. And the beauty of this bridge is not constructed using the traditional brick and mortar with humans doing a lot of concrete mixing and all. This bridge is actually being 3D printed. So imagine a case where we are talking about the 3D printing of a bridge, not any small structure that we are aware of in a typical 3D printer. And since these shapes can be very huge and different, we cannot use a traditional printer kind of mechanism. So what is printing here? Where is the printer in this particular thing? So if you see, there are two robots here. So these robots are actually the 3D printers. So that is the beauty of today. So typically a bridge construction is considered a civil engineering topic. And then maybe some structural engineering, a little bit of mechanical engineering as part of it, and so on. Anything beyond that, civil and mechanical, normally we don't even think about it. But in this case, we are talking about robotics, which consists of mechanical parts. There is a mechatronics, the electronic parts, the electrical drives and controllers that go with it. And then there is a huge amount of software built in it, which continuously estimates. And then, of course, there is a civil engineering aspects of, how to design strength of material and how each block should be printed to be constructed with a specific material. So if you really look at it, this is a combination of civil engineering, architecture, material science, mechatronics, electronics, electrical, computer science, and whatnot. On top of all this, we are also looking at graphics. This modeling has to be done beforehand. Somebody has to validate, okay, to give a go ahead. So there is also things like a CAD and CAM kind of technologies that are also behind it. So it's a huge thing, and this project, as it is happening, has a lot of industries collaborating just to achieve this. The robots come from ABB, for example, and then the CAD tools are from Autodesk, and of course MX3D is the company that is leading it as the integrator of things. So if you really look at it, we are looking at the future. In fact, the present glimpses of what the future will be, and how life is going to change a lot, and what digitalization can bring. So it can be completely fantastic, and we don't have to worry about lot many things that we worry on a typical construction today. So something can be 3D printed, a building can be just constructed by a robot, and life is good. So that can be environmentally clean, and humans will not be exposed to the, for example, the concrete mixture, dust, and so on, and the noise of the construction site, and so on. So it is going to give a lot of positives to us, and this is one example of how things are changing from isolated discipline to something interdisciplinary, which is extremely important. So this is the very first paradigm that we need to keep in mind if you are trying to jump into the digital technologies and digital industries. So then the next very important aspect is, as I mentioned, we are starting with what we call the digitization techniques, where we are basically talking about whatever is available in a non-electronic format, convert into electronic format. So what we do today, if there is an old album, many of you might have seen the albums are there in a printed format. So you take a picture and store it in a soft copy. So anything that is converted into electronic storage constitutes a digitization part. The reason to make a digitization is, first of all, to share with others, I don't have to make physical copies. They can be just shared. We can make electronic copies that can be shared. So that saves a lot of, say, if you take a photograph, a newspaper, or a file noting, the xerox that we do, that much paper is saved. It is environmentally safe. So the digitization is where we are converting whatever we have in the physical things into an electronic format. So the moment something becomes a soft copy, you can call it digitized. So that gives certain benefits, because we are able to share with people at a click of a button, and it is instant. All we need is a logical access. So that is the digitization part, and from there we get into digitalization, where, because as soon as things are available in digital format or electronic format, we are able to do certain kind of linking of various systems or various documents, and then we are able to come with some solution. For example, we can compare, for example, just by having scanned photographs of a reference image, we can always find, if you take a medical case, whether from a golden sample, I can say, is there a change in the appearance of, let us say, a particular structure on the body, to analyze the presence of a tumor or presence of an abnormality. So that kind of thing is possible. So that is simple digitalization, where we use certain digitized information or digital information, and do a little bit of automation and some level of improvement that happens on a continuous basis. That is digitalization. This is what today is commonplace, and we see it everywhere. But the reality is, this itself is only a beginning, but the real one is when we digitally transform. So when we digitally transform, here what we are talking about is, we correlate all kinds of data that is electronically available. It is not going to be just one set of documents or one set of data. All possible data that can be possibly correlated, all kind of machine learning that can be applied to continuously give a complete experience. So for example, as we see, somebody enters a basic data, then till the end result, the entire thing gets done in a digital way, and they are all nicely integrated in a workflow. That is what digital transformation is all about. So this is end to end, and this one is partial. So this one is just the enabler. So one has to digitize to enable the digitalization. Once digitalized, we do islands of automation or partial automation. So, for example, even if you take your own institute, let's say your exam marks are automated, they are printed. But based on that, and can I link the attendance and other aspects and generate the final grade and everything on its own, or can I even create the transfer certificate and all other aspects that can be beyond just printing a mark sheet online. So that is a kind of thing we talk about. So from entry to exit, can we take care of everything? For example, can we consider the percentage and automatically give a scholarship or awards and rewards in an automated manner, completely digital with no human intervention? That is what we are talking about using digital transformation. So the last part is the holistic approach. This is a in-step or in-process approach, and digitization is the enabler. So we enable and then partially do in modules, and then we integrate all of them to make it holistic. That is what when we talk about digital transformation. And then we'll move on to the sensors. And this is probably something as an electronics engineer, we need to be very well aware, and we are already aware. Definitely, I'm pretty sure all of you know about it. But just to keep things in context, that initially sensor came way back in 18th century. And if you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, they are actually corresponding to the industrial revolutions 1, 2, 3, 4, which I'm sure you are all aware of. So sensor 1.0 is when we had the mechanical transducers. So basically, it was just showing some indication of something is even a simple balance, weighing scale and so on. They all can be looked at in a particular way. So there are pressure transmitter and things like that. So that is where it started in a simple mechanical way, and then we added electricity to it as we went to electrical sensors with certain strain gauges and so on. So we started making use of say piezoelectric effect and so on, those kind of things. That became the second generation sensor. And then we came to the current one where we are using a huge amount of electronic sensors. So for example, today we have a thermometer which can digitally indicate the output, and it can also tell various units. It can convert from Fahrenheit to centigrade and so on. So these sensors are kind of nice. They have a digital interface, and they can do a little bit of calibration, and they can do a little bit of compensation. So that is what we are currently using a lot. The current generation is all about smart sensors. Today we are not talking about just a digital interface, but being able to communicate with the rest of the world. As I mentioned, the electronic sensors are like digitalization, and the smart sensors are going to enable the digital transformation. If we build on the previous case of digitalization to digital transformation. So when we look at it, here it is not about one-time calibration, but as you all are aware, every sensor there is a when we did maybe measurements or the test and measurement subjects, you just read about offset, drift that is happening, and then aging and so on, and then all these things can be compensated, and intelligently the sensor gets recalibrated itself to take care of the calibration requirements, age rate of drift, thermal drift, and so on. All of them are actually taken care. Or if it is a weighing machine, we talk about a tare weight and so on. They all are being taken care of on its own, and the sensor continuously adapts itself with the time and realigns itself and remain current. So it is able to keep itself updated, and it is available. That is the kind of smart sensors we are talking about. So at a high level, we are now generalizing it as an IoT. So from typical sensors and relays that were there in the past, now everything is Internet of Things. They can be part of a wireless sensor network. They can be part of a smart home. And for example, we are talking about a mood-based lighting at houses. So we have smart buildings where lighting changes color based on the mood of the people. So that means the sensors are not only just smart, able to sense the mood of the people, but also able to recalibrate and understand the ambience and adjust the lighting conditions, create a shade or whichever reflection that is needed. So that is where the IoT and related technologies are coming through because of the smart sensors. So that is another paradigm. So we need not develop a simple sensor. Today, if you have to develop, it should be an intelligent sensor, and we have to make it smart so that it can co-work with many other systems, and it is able to serve beyond a very simple act of measuring something or controlling certain things. That is about the sensors to IoT aspects of it. And then the next one is about the on-premise to cloud adoption. So cloud technologies or virtual technologies have become commonplace today. And this is really, really a very, very required thing. When we talk of digital transformation, we are talking about linking hundreds and thousands and millions of sensors, and then a lot of machine learning and other algorithms at the back end. So it should be possible to link all of them and crunch that kind of data, which means the cloud technologies are there to stay, and they are the one that will enable it. Because on-premise or at a given location, it is not going to happen. So just some of you may not be clear about what is on-premise and all. So I will explain a little bit here. So if you take any industry, you go to a factory or a plant or any place, there are a lot of sensors at the working level. We call it shop floor, or if it is a construction site where all the machines are working, concrete is being laid, RCC is getting prepared, and structures are getting assembled and so on. So there are all, soft floors. There we have a lot of sensors. These sensors are there, it could be as there could be some temperature and pressure kind of sensors, and there could be some kind of communication interface for alarms, proximity sensors to tell, if there is an intrusion or unwanted movement or unsafe movement. And then there are automation devices like earth movers and so on. So there could be a lot of devices, and this is called on-premise. On-premise means where work is happening, exactly the same place your complete data is stored, your computing infrastructure is stored. So it is, you can think of it as a local server, local databases, and so on. So that is on-premise, and they can be collected and collated across the locations within the place, and the computer can do certain work. That is called the edge. So it is at the edge where actual action is happening. So that is where certain things happen. And there are a lot of things that need to be done at the edge. Because if you really look at it, for example, you think of a automatic door opener. So whenever there is a vehicle or a human coming, the door has to open by sensing. So there has to be a speed. If a vehicle is coming at, let's say, 40 kilometers per hour, the sensor should sense, and it should understand whether this vehicle is authorized to enter or not. Then accordingly, if it is authorized to enter, it should open the door. If it is not authorized, the barricade should be lifted. If it is an unauthorized vehicle, then immediately some alarm has to be raised, and the drivers or vehicles should be flagged to stop immediately for checking or verification purposes. So there is a time limit in which things have to happen. So because of which the act of sensing the presence of vehicle or the human, and then analyzing its content, and then taking a decision has to happen quickly. So we call it a control loop, because based on sensor, there is certain control action that is happening. So because of the control action, we need to do a lot of analysis to be done quickly, and we call it mostly real time, as you can see on top. So on-premise or at the edge, there are a lot of things that need to be done. So they will remain at the edge. So whatever cloud technologies, virtual technologies that may come, and you can keep seeing, there are certain actions that need to be necessarily performed at the edge. So we should know what can go to cloud or what cannot go to cloud. So that is very important. That is what this slide is all about. So there are real-time requirements where the act of sensing, analyzing, and acting has to happen within a short period of time. Most of the time it is hard real time in industry. So they will remain at the edge. And then there are something like over the last 1 year, how things are happening. We want to optimize traffic management. So we want to monitor for some time. Last 3 months, what kind of vehicles are on the road, and how vehicles are behaving, where they are accelerating, where there is an accident prone zone, and so on. So that is called planning and optimization. There we have a larger time. We are collecting data over a period of time, and we have a much more complex algorithm, because the decision is not simple. It has to be much more holistic. So here, a lot of data is involved, and lot of analysis is to be done. So in this particular case, we are actually on the non-real time. So once it is non-real time, then we are talking about possibility of using cloud, because cloud can handle all this kind of huge amount of data, and they also can run complex algorithms with huge computation capability. And of course, you can have an optimization between the, as I mentioned, a simple door control or a vehicle movement at one barricade, one junction to the entire city. You can also do a area wise, something which is in between. So that is where the hybrid cloud or fog can come into picture. So there are things that need to be done at the edge. So there is a local database, local storage, and there is analysis and real-time action. So these things will remain on premise at the edge, and there are some which can take huge number of data with a large time frame, which are typically not real time. So they go to cloud, and then in between there are things which can go into fog or hybrid cloud. So here that means something can be between the cloud and the on-premise. For example, if there are 20 buildings, all the buildings can connect to one centralized building, and each building can be considered an edge, and the complete the entire campus management system can be considered fog, because each building has its own edge level of system available to do the sense, analyze, act, and do the control loop. And then at the campus level, we will use the kind of fog kind of thing where we collate everything from here, but still it is not going to the cloud. It is available at a campus level. Then finally, across campus, we want to do global optimization across multiple institutions. Then we go to the cloud. So that is how the edge of cloud is happening. And it is very important as electronics and communications side on the secure branches and the data science branches to know which data to keep where, what kind of processing should be done at what kind of level. That is extremely important, and this has to be very, very clear. And if you are not appropriate, then we'll have performance issues, because either we'll be spending more because we are using real-time compute resources for non-real-time application, vice versa. So one is about the speed, one is about the scale. That is where we are looking at. So this is about adoption of cloud and where not to adopt cloud, and then the segregation of edge versus fog versus cloud. So now having talked about cloud for gathering data and processing, it's very important to look at what is happening in terms of data versus cloud. So we are looking at that, and if you really see here, this is a very simple rudimentary example. There are many other things that can be talked about. Actually, there is a 4-level hierarchy that you are all aware of pretty much. So at the highest level, we are talking about wisdom. We talk about wise people many a times. We say this fellow is very experienced. Go and ask him. Probably he has a solution. That's why we value even the doctors. We want to go to an experienced doctor and so on, because they have the wisdom where they know how to apply information in an appropriate way, and what makes sense in a given context. So this wisdom is currently at the highest level of knowledge, and that is where our intuition comes into picture, the experience comes into picture, our knowledge comes into picture, and the information at hand. What is the ground reality comes into picture, all those parts. So this is the wisdom part, and to be wise, one should be knowledgeable, because knowledge applied for taking decision is wisdom. But knowledge itself is knowing things. So for example, when we know the knowledge that somebody is, let's say, traveling or doing a paragliding or a jumping, we know there is a suit that has to be worn so that your body suit and parachute is safe, life-saving guards are to be put. That is knowledge. But wisdom is about looking at the person and the age and the health conditions. What kind of suit to be done? They should have a special gears or the standard one. So that is what is wisdom we are talking about. So knowledge is about knowing things. Okay. But how do you know things? Based on the information that we have or we already had in the past. So it is based on the past learning and the current information. So information is about a particular traffic light has turned red, because of which maybe I have to stop. That is the information. But many times we don't store say a line like the south facing traffic light at a junction of Pitt and George streets have turned red. It is never stored like that. It is a traditional language, a natural language, if you would like to call it. So the way it is stored is, signal color is one field in a database, and somebody is storing it as red, and and then V2.0 means, junction, some identifier is there, or not south direction can be V2, which is south facing, and then the junction is indicated by the four directions and things like that. There is a encoding, that is raw data. So we basically normalize data so that information is uh, converted into raw data, and they are stored in a consistent manner in a normalized manner. That was in the past. We used to store a lot of data by taking or extracting this from information and downgrading it. So whenever we do this, for example, if we see this raw data, unless somebody is very knowledgeable what that red means, what that this number means, and this parameter 2.0 means, one cannot translate into the above information, which is one level up. So earlier, this was put in the form of procedures and functions, or a lookup table. So that is what. So from data, we write procedures to reconstruct the information, because in the 80s and 90s, the cost of storage was extremely high. So anybody who has read, design of databases will know that, data has to be, anything that can be derived should not be stored. You should only store the basic data elements, and that should be consistent, and that should be normalized. And to the extent possible, you have to encode it so that, there is a lookup table, so that, we save, conserve space. So the databases were basically to conserve space. That is what was done in the 80s and 90s. Because of which we had to strip lot of information and put that into the logic while generating the views or the procedures. So we used to create labels in the displays and so on to indicate what that red means. We can say traffic signal color, something like that. We label it while displaying it. So that is information. So today, actually, we are moving away from data and going up to the information aspect. Today, we do not, given that, now data storage is pretty much cheap, and the communication is given, everybody has a data communication. So today, that's why we are having this webinar with, so many participants live, and we have the kind of bandwidth that is amazing. And the cell phone that is in your hand has much more power than the laptop probably that I am using. So that because of all this, we do not have to downgrade the information to data. We can handle information as it is. So this is something you need to be very clear, because then we will be dealing between knowledge and information. So we are going one level up in the hierarchy towards wisdom. Instead of information to data and putting it back, we are working from information to knowledge. So we are going up north in terms of our level of improvement or growth. So that is what we have to look at it. And the new paradigm is store information as it is, and then extract what you need. That is what is happening. Because of this, we have a lot of semi-formal data stores that are coming through. We have data lakes concept. We are looking at XML kind of markup languages which can support semi-structured data. We have JSON kind of storage. We have NoSQL and whatnot. There are number of options to store this kind of information. And once we start dealing information as is, then we can think about how do we extract knowledge by adding context to it. So not just the meaning, but we add context. That is where we can go. And once context is also established and we mature there, then we can look at applied knowledge. That is where we are talking about complete autonomy. That we'll see a little later in another slide. So now when we talk about just information and knowledge, we are also talking about experience. If you see on the left hand side, we are talking about just today I took a snapshot in the morning. What is the coronavirus update? So this is what we are getting. This is through a traditional IO device. I am seeing it on my monitor right now. But that is no more reality, because I am not getting a feel of, my God, 36 lakhs people have been infected. As many as 2.5 lakh deaths. That feel doesn't come. It is just a number. So someone has to get a feeling. So we are moving away from simple IO devices to what we call immersive experience, which is enabled by various reality techniques. Today we have augmented reality, virtual reality, and of course mixed reality and so on. So many gaming consoles are today coming with certain sensors to give you the experience of virtual reality. We have various glasses of different types which you can use to create a virtual reality experience. And there are movies theaters that offer 6D experience, 7D experience, where the seat from where I'm watching the movie, the seat itself vibrates, the temperature changes, and there are flares that go across you. You all might have attended or seen some of the movies like that. So we are talking about experience that is immersive. So you get a feel of what is happening. This is all the more relevant in today COVID situation where we are not able to travel. So if I cannot travel, can I actually feel how ice feels like, or how a beach looks like, or how a snow-capped mountain looks like when we are not allowed to travel? So, or what about space? How it will feel like in Mars. So we are looking at an immersive experience as an option. So there are already companies that are offering that kind of technologies and facilities to you. So that is something very important. We are talking about no more interfaces with a simple dashboard. We are talking about immersive experience. So what we are showcasing should be felt. It should not be just reading a number for the sake of it. So that is where the complete things are changing. We are looking at, for example, helmet-mounted 3D displays that are currently becoming popular, for example. So the last part I said in terms of shifting paradigms, this is a very key aspect. For those of you who may find this terminology new, a capex is called capital expenditure. Short form is capex. And when we talk of capex, let's say I will take a very simple example of a vehicle. Today you want a car. So if you buy the car, there are many benefits. You own it, you can customize it. You can have certain things in the car storage, and you don't have to remove it every time you like. And there can be certain specific way interior can be decorated and so on. So you own the vehicle, and then it is at your disposal for all the time. Do whatever you want, and you can personalize it to the extent that is allowed in the law, and to the extent you can afford it. That is capex, and when you do that, there are certain all the benefits I mentioned, but then there are also limitations. The first limitation is since I own the vehicle, I need to insure it. I need to store it as park it somewhere in a safe way, and then we also need to invest heavily to buy the vehicle. That is what is capex is all about. And if you go to OPEX, it is all about operational expenses. For example, instead of buying a car, maybe I can simply rent a car. So I pay per use. If I don't use it, I don't have to worry about a parking lot. I don't worry about how does it look inside. I need not worry about the insurance of it. What happens because of say this lockdown happened, and 3 weeks I'm not able to take the vehicle out, then engine will not be able to start it. So we need to have a look for a jump start option and so on. So those are the challenges we have. So there are some benefits of capex, some benefits of OPEX, but then the limitations of OPEX, for example, in the case of car, is I cannot leave anything inside. I cannot customize something on the dashboard. I don't have the fragrance I want when I am in the car, or I cannot adjust the seat cover in a way I feel like. All those aspects are involved. Or at the back side, I want to have a particular stuffed animal to be kept. Those things do not happen. So that is where the challenges are capex and opex. But from at an industry level, at a very high level, from an economy point of view, capex brings certain things. If you have a lot of resources with you, upfront money available, then you invest in capital, because capex investments typically can be used to gain, for example, tax benefits. You can depreciate its value over a time. If it is opex, it is like you spent and it does not carry any value for tomorrow. So there is no long-term benefit in OPEX. So however, the general trend is whatever can be done using OPEX, you must do, and what cannot be in OPEX alone should be in CAPEX. Because world is changing very fast, technology is changing very fast. So we don't want to be stuck with the past burdens or the liabilities. So that is where it is, OPEX and CAPEX is all about. So the world is moving from CAPEX to OPEX. So in a sense, today, for example, you are all buying a cell phone, and then you are replacing, the cell phone can work for 3 years, 5 years, but after 6 months, it is outdated. we are looking at, you need to upgrade. When you upgrade, we lose a lot of value. Instead, what if we get an option of, upgrading every 6 months? I rent a phone for 6 months or 3 months, or for a given period, and then I change it. So it is similar to even building your own house versus, renting a house. So building a house means your mobility is fixed. You are stuck to that one place. You cannot change the business or the job or the institution. Otherwise, you have to think about the travel options and all those things. So whereas in a rented house, the decor is not totally in your control, and so on. So it's a question of, you are still dependent on the provider of the house or the rental building. And anytime we can have contract clauses for vacating the same and so on. So both come with plus and minus, but the industry trend is moving from capex to opex. Across the globe, every business is trying to move everything to operational expense. The benefit is, if I don't use, I don't pay. So if there is a lockdown for 3 months, whoever was using OPEX, their expense is pretty much zero, because I never rented a car to travel, because I did not travel. But if I owned a car, these 3 months still I'm paying for insurance. Still I'm taking the vehicle out once in a week so that the battery does not go dead. And then my vehicle is getting depreciated continuously, because 3 months are gone in any case, and I still need to pay either EMI or whatever it is. So the general trend is paradigm is to go to OPEX. So as an engineer, we should be also aware of what are the financial implications of whatever we are talking or doing. So this comes to the, as I said, the shifting paradigm part, which pretty much covers all the things that are going to follow. The rest are all the after effect or side effect of these aspects I discussed so far. So now this is something we always share, think global, act local. What does that mean? Because we always act locally. Rarely we can do global. We are not omnipresent. We are not omniscient. And it is not possible to act globally sitting at one place. So wherever you are, we can at the best do a local action most of the time. There are exceptions, but in a generic sense, all we can do is act locally. But what do you mean by think global, act local? So it is as simple as that. Let's say we can take a waste management as the simplest example. Say in your own residences where you are staying, where you are right now there, what happens every day? We clean the house. At the end, whatever waste is there, be it kitchen or be it general dust and so on, what do? We have many options. Either we can just throw it outside the house, or we can throw it to the corner of the street. These are all possible, right? So that is kind of acting very, very locally, because I wanted my space, my residence to be clean. I just cleaned it up. I never bothered about what next. So what does not get translated here is, for example, we threw say wet waste, food waste, and that is dumped in the street corner. And what happens if it is lying there? Maybe the house is clean, but after a week we get a stinking smell coming to us, and then slowly certain kind of insects and worms start coming there. They start getting produced. So that means we are starting environmental pollution. We are becoming a health hazard for the entire area. But that is called acting local. So in this case, for example, here is a plant which is emitting lot of plume. If you really look at it, the chimneys are so high, probably right below the plant, the plumes will not be effective. The fumes will not even come down. So they will move a little bit away, couple of kilometers or a few hundreds of kilometers, before they will actually impact the environment. This is acting local. What is think global? You have to still act locally, but what can be thinking global? If you take the waste management I talked about at the home, the simplest is, I don't throw it. I have a small pit created. I create a wet compost at home. So I have maybe 3 pits. Each pit every month gets converted over a period of, it takes 75 days to 90 days for a pit to become a compost after you dump things. So I have pits. So I convert all my wet waste into compost, and then I use it for my kitchen gardening, or or I give it to the grassland that is nearby, I donate it to the park next in the locality and so on. That is thinking global, because I am not only acting locally, but I'm ensuring that rest of the world is also not impacted or environment is impacted. So in this, if you take this case, the plumes, instead of letting it out, they can put filter, they can actually segregate the solid waste that can be collected, and then they can be processed for different purposes. And the plume can be as per regulatory norms. They can reduce the greenhouse effects and the improve the global pollution situation. Those are the things that are possible. So every act that is done locally should be keeping the global in mind. So for example, even when you consume, it may be better you take naturally grown or organic vegetables as against that is processed fertilizer being used and pesticides being used, because the land how it can regenerate in a natural way using a mulch and compost is quite different from way when we use chemicals like pesticides. So that is why one has to act local, but always think global before doing anything. So that's why we had a no plastic experience, Swachh Bharat experience, and things like that. So whatever act we do locally should be keeping global in mind. That is something that is very essential, because as we go into the digital industry, everything is connected. So there is nothing local. Even though we think it is only local, there is nothing local. Everything is global. Yeah. So then, what a digital industry? So just to keep your thinking, in a different way, instead of right to left, I made it the other way. So the digital industry is actually here, what I call autonomous, but it starts with manual. We have a lot of industries that are traditionally manual, where human is doing the job. For example, you go to a typical jewelry maker, and he is making a jewel based on the design given by you. That is purely manual. There is an individual. He, as an expert, he is doing it. That is what happens. It is all human doing the entire work. That is the manual industry, and there are areas there it will continue. I think this will never go away 100%. But majority of industries today are in the assisted type. When I say assisted type, here there is a human involved, but there is a mechanism available that will reduce the effort of the human. For example, one example I have given is a lathe. So there is a lathe operator, but the actual work is being done by the lathe, but managed directly by the operator. So that is a assisted industry, if you want to call it. So that is what we can do. There are PLCs you can program, for example, and so on. So then we are going to the next level, which is called the automated industry. In this case, in a lathe, the person has to be always there. He should load the tool, he should load the workpiece, and then he should monitor it continuously. Same thing can be fully automated. So in which case, for example, you can pre-program. The CNC machine will automatically choose the right tool. It will pick up the right source piece, and it will complete the job and put it in a given bin. So that is called the automated system. So automated systems require a little bit of programming. So you tell what it is to be done, and it will do. So it is called the programmed. You can program the thing what it has to do. That is called automated. So then, where we are not there is autonomous. So what is autonomous then? Is automated not equal to autonomous? That is the question. So the difference between automated and autonomous is, suppose we programmed a machine, and for example, while it is doing its job, a tool broke. Then what happens? Then the automated system will stop functioning. It will just stop, because it does not know how to proceed. So that is automation. So its production is automated, or routine activity is automated, but nothing beyond. If it is autonomous, then it has the ability to first diagnose itself that there is some fault, and once it knows there is a fault, it will try to fix it by itself, and then it will recover and restart. For example, in an autonomous system, if a tool is broken, it will immediately identify, oh, the tool is broken, so it will stop the production, it will remove the tool, and it will collect all the pieces that has fallen apart and put it in a specific bin, and then alert the people saying that here is a tool broken and I need an alternate tool. Currently, I'm running with a standby tool that is available with me, but I have only 2 days by which time I need a replacement. And like that, it will take care of it, and then it will repair, it will reload, and then it will run on its own. So the ability to recover from a fault by identifying, by fixing it, and then continue its operation, that is autonomous. So today, the digital industry's ultimate aim is to go autonomous, but that is way far away. So we are somewhere currently the focus is mostly on automation and towards autonomy, but not full autonomous system. That is where we are. But at the end of the day, autonomous systems are coming up and they're going to be staying. So to achieve all this, there are various levers. I think by now, this is already a known thing, nothing new to add. So there are smart sensors that are required. I mentioned about IoT, and then I mentioned about connectivity to the cloud and edge and so on. So that is also mentioned. And then huge amount of data in a data lake, and actual reality immersive experience related things. And then to process the thing, continuous learning, because to be autonomous, someone has to learn, should know automatically what is to be done to fix. So AI, ML technologies, and then of course material that need to be smart. So probably this is something we did not cover in detail, but smart materials are one that will also provide inputs and that will adopt itself. So for example, uh, what happens if you are a player playing a football, you are a high level football player. So your smart material is when on hearing an impact, it can immediately release a painkiller because the person has been hit by a either he's been kicked or if it's a cricket, the ball has hit him and so on. So there are smart materials that are coming up that can react. There are few smart materials that are already in place. For example, if smart stents that are used in healthcare industry, there are drug elucidating stents. So they release drug slowly whenever they hear certain things. So there could be a smart material that are already in place. So these are the things that are going to be the levers for the digital industry based on the shifting paradigms that I already updated. So then as an engineer, what are the opportunities in this new era? So typically when I talk to a lot of students and those who are looking for a career, everybody wants to be in R&D, either in the research or the design and development, because it seems to be very, very fancy. So just I wanted to put across to you that what it means in terms of numbers. So let's say you're thinking about a fantastic vehicle that you want to design, autonomous vehicle. So that car is going to give it can be, maybe it can go wherever you want. It can jump across hurdles. It can it can go in the water. It can fly. Also, it can hop. It can go on the road and so on. Let's say. And then how many fundamental researchers are needed? Probably, the design has to come. Somebody has to think about a good idea and come with, one solution. So this is basically maybe 2 or 3 people can come up, a few people can come with an idea. And then that is what we need. As soon as there is an idea here from the research lab, then there are, a dozen labs that start working across. Then they start developing what they are talking in theory, is it really possible or not? So there are R&D labs which will start trying to create a question answers on how true it is it feasible, technically feasible, and what not. So for every research output, probably there is a 10 to 15 kind of design and development lab efforts that will start. And the moment there is a design, then the engineering and production comes. For example, once there is a vehicle designed, then there are a lot of variants. I want to have a low-end variant, high-end variant, 2-seater, 5-seater, pillion rider, no pillion rider, and so on. Luxury, semi-luxury, super luxury, SUV, cross, hybrid, and so on, electric, non-electric, and so on. So for each design, there are multiple engineering variants. Then we are talking about hundreds of production units. So yeah, one idea becomes about 10 labs. 10 labs results in, let's say, about 100 production places. And when 100 factories produce, we have probably 10,000 marketing and sales outlets, because that much has to be sold. And when you have 10,000 outlets selling items, probably we need 100,000 service and support requirements. mechanics and the workshop that are needed to support this sold item. So if you really look at it, what was 1 year became already close to 100,000, 1 lakh or even more, depending on the level of impact and the scale. So if you're looking at opportunities, do not get carried away by this R&D fanfare and all, because the real number of people that are required here are very less. Because even if you create 1 lakh new designs, and it's not going to work because market is available only so much. There are only less than 10 billion people in the globe. So we have to think like that. So the highest number of opportunities are in marketing, sales, service, and support. And of course, there is something mid-level at the engineering and production level. And then we are talking about fundamental R&D few people. So it is not to say that someone is more important or less important. Each one has a role to play, because the design has no value if it is not serving the end user. If the end user is not benefited, if somebody does not improve on it. So everything has a value, but think about your career depending on what you like. Don't go by peer pressure and social pressure. These are the opportunities in various domains you have to think. And then before I close, because I think pretty much an hour is gone, and then we are talking about few final thoughts. So world is going towards what we call personalized experience in terms of final thoughts. Nobody wants to be treated as a group or a number. Everybody wants to be personally treated. People would like to be called by their name. People would like to be given food of their choice. Even if somebody is offered a cup of tea or coffee with appropriate sugar levels, whether it is be a jaggery, or it should be a processed sugar, or it should be a stevia, whatever it is. So people are interested in personalized experience. So whoever is offering that are likely to survive. And then people are worried about security and privacy because everything is digital, which actually means there is people are worried about what get exposed. And we are reading news about privacy violation every day now. So this is something we have to keep in mind in every job we do, every time we change data, exchange data, and so on. Then collaboration, because of the interdisciplinary nature I started right in the beginning. Collaboration is very much the norm. If I say I'm a loner, those days are pretty much gone. If you want to be in the society, we should be able to collaborate. And when we collaborate, we should be empathetical in nature. We should try to understand from the other point of view what the other person is saying and why is he saying so. Accordingly, we have to work on it. So empathy becomes a very critical factor. And the end, what is going to keep you alive is being a human, not otherwise. So be human. That is the most important aspect. If you are human, automatically empathy will come. And if you have empathy, you will automatically collaborate. And once you collaborate and you have empathy, you will understand their concerns and take care of the security, privacy, and you will provide personalized experience. Actually, though I put it from top to bottom, if you are human, appropriate, good human, the rest will automatically fall in place. So this is where I will stop. I think pretty much 1 hour gone after I started itself. Sorry for being overshooting the 11 o'clock schedule. And I'm okay to take a few questions if there is a time. Otherwise, thank you again for your patience, and good to have a 50+ attendance. And thank KCG and Professor Tulasi and Dr. Kavita.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah. That was a very useful and a very good presentation on various levers of digital industry, sir. Any questions are there? Anybody? Participants? You can put up your hands. You have any questions? Or maybe put in chat.
There was one question in chat.
Yes, ma'am. We'll check on that. I could not find it. Anybody else?
Okay. If it is then, if there is no question, then we can wind it up.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir. That's Sivan.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning, Sadashivam. I can hear you. Please go ahead.
The lecture was very nice, sir. We understood what is digitalization, and digital transformation. The differences are very well explained, sir. Thank you. My question is, are our people are empowered to act for this digital transformation?
Uh, yeah, I think it's a very relevant question. Thanks for the appreciation. Definitely, we are empowered. It's a question of we want to exercise it or not, because nothing stops us in doing the digital transformation today. Today, you look at the number of hackathons, for example, be it Smart India Hackathon, and there are hundreds of hackathons. What are they saying? Don't wait to graduate from whatever you're doing. It doesn't matter today. Even for the COVID, there is a challenge for school kids offered by Government of India. Till 10th of May, the competition is open. So you can come up with innovative ideas, and you are empowered, and you don't have to only think, there is a syllabus I'm studying, I have to only score marks. There are many channels by which you can collaborate, and you are empowered to showcase your solutions. And then because of the digital world, it will be visible to everyone, and whoever finds it useful will come back to you, and you will be valued. I think that is what is going to take you forward. We are all empowered many times, just that we are not aware. I will always remember the story of Hanuman. Some of you may know there is a Ramayana story. Till this person, Jambavan, who actually reminded Hanuman of his powers. Hanuman did not remember that he had so many powers and boons, because he was cursed by somebody for being naughty during childhood. So it's all about we being able to identify, yeah, this is something I can do. Why not? I'm doing it. That is what we should do. We should take it in our hands and do it the right way. But like I said, these levers are important. Be human, and don't overdo things. And if you, as a human, you take whatever power you have and you are empowered. Definitely, you are welcome to question. You are welcome to offer solutions. You are welcome to take humanity forward.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I could see one more question, sir. It says, what would be the success rate of autonomous mode in power industry?
The success mode percentage, if you want to say.
Success rate of
autonomous mode. Success rate, like I said, currently we are looking at automation as the key. So there are a lot of events happening on automation world and things like that. So full autonomy is quite away, sometime away. It is going to be more like what we do in integration. We have a limit x tending to infinity or zero. So autonomy is going to be a limit kind of exercise. So I believe at least in the near future, it is not going to be 100% autonomous. But the question is, can there be pockets of autonomous which can be isolated and independent? The answer is yes. And where it will come first in terms of autonomy, probably space, because there we have no other choice. Because if I really look at our own Mars landing, there, because it was mostly automated, not 100% autonomous, while it was descending, the control was made from Earth station, from the Earth, which means there was a time delay between when something was sensed in the moon and the signals came to India. Our scientists needed to work on it, give the control back. So the delay of few seconds costed our entire mission, not to fully succeed. We learned a lot, but it did not land the way we expected. That is because it was not fully autonomous. It was a lot of automation was there. The fully autonomous part was missing, because to be fully autonomous, the system should be that much intelligent. That is where currently techniques are being developed. So autonomy, it is a wish list, and it will come probably in the long term. But short and medium term, the percentage of autonomous automation will increase. And automation is sure to be close to 100%, I'm sure. But autonomy, yeah, it's a wish list. I do not have a definitive answers, but it will happen not in the next 5 to 10 years, but beyond that. That's what is my take on that.